If you wake up tired after sleeping, this may explain why. There are moments in the night when the room is quiet, your body is still, your eyes are closed, and yet something is active. Some attacks don't arrive with noise. They don't announce themselves. They don't shake the house or raise your heart rate. They wait for sleep. You lie down expecting rest, but you wake up feeling drained, as if the night took more than it gave. Your body slept, but something else stayed awake. Many people call it stress. Some call it bad dreams. Others ignore it completely. But there is a pattern few are taught to recognize. Because the night hides things daylight exposes, and sleep lowers guards that effort keeps standing. If you've ever woken up suddenly, for no clear reason, at the same hour, again and again, this message is for you. If you've ever felt watched without seeing anything, if your chest felt heavy only after midnight, if your mind replayed thoughts you didn't invite, this message is for you. I'm not here to alarm you. I'm here because silence has cost people too much. There are experiences that don't happen while you're awake. They choose the hours when defenses are down. They choose stillness. They choose darkness, not as fear, but as cover. Some people wake up with memories they can't place. Others wake with emotions that don't belong to the day ahead. Some wake with pressure, confusion, exhaustion, and no explanation that fits. They pray harder. They fast longer. They blame themselves. But the timing is the clue. Because certain encounters do not interrupt your day. They schedule themselves at night. You may think sleep is neutral. You may think rest is passive. It isn't. The night is not empty. It is active territory, and most people were never taught that. There are signs people dismiss because they happen quietly. No scream, no shadow on the wall. Just a slow exchange. Energy for exhaustion, clarity for fog, peace for weight. And when morning comes, you carry the residue into your day without knowing where it started. This isn't about fear. Fear is loud. This is about awareness. Because what you don't recognize, you tolerate. And what you tolerate returns. I didn't learn this from books. I learned it from participation, from experience, from being on the other side of what most people only feel. What I'm about to share isn't theory. It's memory. There are systems that function best when people are unconscious. There are operations that avoid resistance by choosing sleep. There are assignments that end before sunrise, and they leave no fingerprints, only symptoms. If you've been wondering why rest doesn't restore you, why the night feels productive but not for you, why something shifts between laying down and waking up, stay with me. Don't rush. Don't scroll. Let the silence work. And I'm not talking about nightmares. Nightmares end when you wake up. This continues after you rise. This isn't imagination, it's pattern. Because imagination doesn't repeat itself at the same hour. Imagination doesn't leave the same weight in the body. Imagination doesn't respond to prayer with silence. If it were just stress, prayer would fix it instantly. If it were just fatigue, rest would restore you. If it were just the mind, clarity would return by morning. But when prayer doesn't stop it, something else is happening. I learned this the hard way. There were nights when everything looked normal, the room, the clock, the bed. Yet the moment sleep came, activity began. Not images, not fear, transaction, energy moved, access opened. Something responded to the stillness, and the people involved never remembered the encounter, only the effect. They woke up heavy, delayed, disconnected. Back then, we counted on that, because the most effective encounters leave no memory, only consequence. This is the part people miss. True warfare doesn't always confront you. Sometimes it cooperates with your routine. It waits until you lay down willingly, until resistance rests. I participated in systems designed around timing, not chaos. Timing. Certain hours were chosen because prayer habits were weakest then, because awareness was lowest, because the soul was quiet but open. We weren't after screams. We were after permission through unawareness. And it worked. People blamed themselves. They blamed their discipline. They blamed their faith. Meanwhile, the pattern continued untouched. Same hour, same exhaustion, same confusion on waking. That's when I knew this wasn't random, and it wasn't harmless. Because when something repeats without your consent, it's not coincidence, it's access. And once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. The question isn't if something is happening. The question is why it happens only when you sleep. Stay with me. The signs are quieter than you expect. Before I became a believer, I participated in night rituals. I didn't learn by emotion. I learned by observation. I studied patterns, timing, repetition, response. What weakened people, what left them confused by morning, what made rest ineffective. I saw how certain hours were chosen deliberately, not because they were dark, but because resistance was low. I watched what happened to people who ignored early signs. First, sleep stopped restoring them. Then focus slipped, then discipline weakened. Nothing dramatic at first, just erosion. I learned which symptoms were dismissed as normal, and which ones meant something had already begun. This isn't opinion, it's sequence. And once you've seen it from the inside, you don't guess anymore. You recognize it. The first sign is subtle. So subtle most people never label it as a sign. It doesn't scare you. It doesn't interrupt your life. It feels almost normal. You wake up and think, I just didn't sleep well. You move on. You adapt. You normalize it. But repetition is never accidental. When the same sensation follows you from night to night, when rest stops restoring but you keep functioning anyway, that's how it stays hidden. Because subtle signs survive when people explain them away. The second sign makes people doubt themselves. This one attacks perception. You begin questioning what you felt, what you saw, what you sensed. You remember waking suddenly, but by morning it feels distant, almost unreal. You ask yourself, was that even real? Am I just imagining things? And once doubt enters, discernment weakens. This sign doesn't come with pain. It comes with confusion. Thoughts you didn't start linger longer than they should. Emotions arrive without a clear source. You feel out of alignment, but can't name why. And because nothing visible happened, you turn inward instead of staying alert. That's the design. The third sign is the one witches rely on most. It's not fear, it's familiarity. It's when something enters your night often enough that your spirit stops reacting. The same dreams, the same awakenings, the same heaviness at the same moment. Not dramatic enough to panic, just consistent enough to condition you. I've seen how repetition dulls awareness. I've watched people lose sensitivity slowly, not because they were weak, but because they were never warned. This sign works best on faithful people, disciplined people, people who endure quietly, because endurance without knowledge can become exposure. And here's where my confession matters. Before I stepped away from that world, we didn't need permission. We needed timing. We didn't fight effort. We waited for sleep. Because sleep is not empty, it's a doorway state, where resistance lowers and access increases. Most people think attacks look aggressive. They don't. They look passive. They blend into routine. And that's why the most dangerous sign is rarely noticed. But there is one more. And this one doesn't happen randomly. It happens within specific hours. Not every night. Not all at once. But when it happens, it leaves marks people carry into their day without knowing where they came from. That one is the hardest to detect and the easiest to dismiss. I won't explain it yet, because once you recognize it, you can't unsee it. And once you see it, the night doesn't feel the same again. Stay with me. We're not done. I want to start with a woman I counseled. I won't use her name. I won't share her city, because this isn't about her identity. It's about the pattern. She told me she was doing everything right. She slept early, 8 hours, sometimes more, phone away, lights off, no distractions. And yet, every morning felt like she had run all night instead of rested. She didn't wake refreshed, she woke heavy. Her body moved but slowly. Her thoughts felt delayed, like they were arriving late to her own mind. Simple decisions took effort. Even joy felt far away. She assumed it was stress, work, life, pressure. That's what everyone told her. So she pushed harder. She prayed longer in the mornings, but the prayers felt thick, not blocked, just slow. Like words were moving through resistance. Worship didn't lift her the way it used to. Scripture didn't settle easily. Motivation dropped without warning. And the strange part was this. By afternoon, she often felt better. Not perfect, but lighter. By evening, she could laugh, she could focus, she could function. Then she would sleep and wake up drained again. Over and over. She told me, it feels like the night takes something from me. Then she laughed nervously and said, I know that sounds strange. It wasn't strange to me, because exhaustion caused by life usually shows up after the day, but hers showed up before it began. That's when I asked her one question. Does this fatigue ever start during the day, or only after you sleep? She paused. Then she said something that changed everything. Only after I sleep. Same bedtime. Same routine, different mornings, but always the same result. That was the turning point. Because timing tells the truth when explanations fail. This wasn't her workload. Workload builds gradually. This wasn't diet. Diet doesn't reset itself every night. This wasn't emotion. Emotional weight doesn't follow a clock so precisely. What she was experiencing followed a schedule. Night, sleep, drain, repeat. I didn't say much at first. I let her talk. She admitted she had started dreading bedtime, not consciously, but emotionally. She would lie down and feel uneasy without knowing why. Nothing visible, nothing dramatic, just a quiet resistance to rest. She also mentioned something else. She often woke briefly at the same hour, not fully awake, not fully asleep. No fear, no clear dream, just awareness. Then back to sleep. And morning came with the same weight. This is where confession matters. Because before I believed what I believe now, I was taught how the night is used. Not in movies, not in stories. In practice, sleep isn't just rest, it's access. When the body shuts down, the mind quiets and defenses lower. That's why timing matters more than intensity. Some exchanges don't need force, they need permission through unconsciousness. This woman wasn't weak, she wasn't lazy, she wasn't failing spiritually, she was unaware of when the drain was happening. And what happens at night often escapes logic, because it leaves no memory, only residue. By the time she wakes up, the event is over, only the effect remains. Fatigue without cause, slowness without explanation, prayer without ease. I told her something carefully. What drained you wasn't stress, I said. It was timing. Her eyes filled, not with fear but relief, because for the first time, the pattern made sense. And this is what many miss. If exhaustion starts after rest, the rest isn't the problem. The night is. This is only the first sign, and it's one of the quietest, because people blame themselves. They adjust schedules, they push harder. But they never question when the exchange is happening. And until timing is exposed, the cycle repeats. What she experienced wasn't rare. It was familiar. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Because the night doesn't only restore, sometimes it collects. And that realization is where everything began to change. If this sounds familiar, comment I'm awake. Because awareness changes positioning. I need to say this carefully. What follows is not exaggeration. It's not dramatization. It's a confession layered with understanding. There was a time when night was not rest to me. It was access. I knew which hours opened people. I knew when resistance thinned. I knew the difference between a body asleep and a spirit unguarded. Most people think sleep is absence. It isn't. It's transition. And transitions are monitored. I remember how assignments were measured, not by screams, not by visible fear, but by outcomes the next day. Fatigue without labor. Confusion without cause. Delay without obstruction. You'd be surprised how many battles are won without confrontation. Because warfare doesn't always break in. Sometimes it's invited by unawareness. I saw how patterns were studied, how habits were mapped, how nights were selected based on consistency. Same bedtime, same posture, same environment. Predictability is permission. When people prayed loudly during the day but slept carelessly at night, the night compensated. I watched how thoughts were introduced that didn't sound foreign, just familiar enough to be accepted. Doubt that felt like logic, weariness that felt earned, distance that felt natural. And by morning, people assumed it was them. That was the goal. Because if you blame yourself, you never challenge the source. Here's the part most never hear. Not every attack feels negative. Some feel neutral, some feel quiet, some feel like nothing at all. Until accumulation sets in. One night does little. Repeated access does everything. I remember leaving places untouched, not because they were protected, but because they were alert. Awareness disrupts timing. Alertness shifts authority. There were nights we avoided entirely because the atmosphere wouldn't cooperate. Peace can be hostile to intrusions. This is why some of you feel resistance increase only when you decide to rest properly. Only when you begin to pray differently. Only when you start paying attention. You think it's coincidence. It isn't. The moment you move from unconscious participation to conscious positioning, the environment reacts. Let me be clear. I am not sharing this to elevate fear. Fear weakens perception. I'm sharing this because recognition restores control. You were never meant to be passive at night. You were meant to be covered. There's a reason certain dreams repeat. There's a reason wake-up times are consistent. There's a reason exhaustion ignores sleep length. Those are signals, not flaws, and when you name them, they lose leverage. What changed everything for me was realizing that night did not belong to whoever showed up first. Authority responds to awareness. That's why this matters. That's why I asked you to say, I'm awake. Because once you are, access changes. And what used to operate unnoticed can no longer remain. There is a reason the dreams repeat. Not the details, the pattern. Different faces, different settings, different nights, but the same outcome. You're running, but never arriving. You're being watched, but never seeing who. You return to a place you've never visited in real life, yet it feels familiar. Your mouth opens, but no sound comes out. At first, people dismiss it. They say, it's just a dream. They say, it's stress. They say, my mind is tired. That's the mistake, because random dreams change. Patterns don't. I know this because I was trained to look for patterns, not as a victim, but as a participant. When I was involved in witchcraft, we were not interested in one-time encounters. One-time moments fade. We looked for return paths. Dreams were not used for drama. They were used for consistency. If someone appeared once, it meant nothing. If they returned, it meant something had opened. The theme mattered more than the story. Being chased didn't mean fear, it meant pursuit. Being watched didn't mean danger, it meant attention. Returning to the same place didn't mean imagination. It meant familiarity had been established. Being unable to speak wasn't panic, it was restraint. And this is the part people don't like to hear, because it removes comfort. In witchcraft, repetition means access, not ownership, not control. Access. It meant the boundary had been crossed once and successfully, so it was tested again and again and again. That's why the dreams don't escalate quickly, they repeat quietly. The goal was never to scare. Fear wakes people up. The goal was familiarity. Familiarity lowers resistance. I remember nights when assignments were evaluated by one question only. Did they return? Not, did they react? Not, did they feel afraid? Just, did they come back to the same environment? Because if the answer was yes, it meant the door didn't close when the person woke up. Most people don't realize this. Dreams are not always invitations. Sometimes they are confirmations. You wake up thinking nothing happened, but something did. Because the same theme means the same route. And the same route means it's still open. That's why some of you feel like you're progressing in life, yet stuck in sleep. Your days move forward. Your nights loop. Different week. Same chase. Different year. Same room. Different season. Same silence in your mouth. That's not coincidence. And I'm saying this slowly because this part carries weight. The mind doesn't repeat without reason. When I was on the other side of this, we didn't need people to believe in what we were doing. We needed them to return. Belief wasn't required. Participation was unconscious. Sleep handled the rest. And here's the confession part most people avoid, because it exposes how quiet this really is. Many of the people affected were prayerful. Some were fasting. Some were devoted. None of that stopped repetition if the pattern was unaddressed. Because repetition is not about morality, it's about permission, often given without words. And the permission didn't come during the dream, it came before it, through exhaustion, through emotional openness, through unresolved grief, through prolonged stress, through moments when the mind laid down defenses long before the body did. That's why the dreams feel personal, they are, but not in the way people think. You're not being tormented randomly, you're being revisited intentionally. And no, I'm not explaining how yet, because understanding the what must come before confronting the why. All you need to recognize right now is this: if the dream keeps returning to the same theme, something is trying to stay connected. And it doesn't need your awareness to do it. It only needs your sleep. There is a reason attacks prefer repetition. And it's not what most Christians think. Most people assume repetition means persistence. They believe if something happens again and again, it's because resistance is weak or prayer isn't strong enough. That's not why repetition is chosen. Repetition is about conditioning. I know this because I once helped design it. When something happens once, the mind resists. When it happens twice, the mind questions. When it happens many times, the mind adapts. Repetition trains the soul to accept what it should challenge. That's why the night visits feel familiar. That's why the hour is often the same. That's why the exhaustion feels normal after a while. Normal is the goal. Because once something feels normal, You stop investigating it. In the systems I was part of, we didn't aim for dramatic encounters. Drama wakes people up. We aimed for patterns. A dream that returns with slight changes. A pressure that appears only when the body rests. A thought that doesn't shock you anymore. Not force. Permission. Repetition isn't about power. It's about access. Each repeated moment tests a boundary. Not to break it immediately, but to see if it will be guarded. When no response comes, the system marks it as open. This is why some people pray intensely once, and then feel worse. The system doesn't retreat. It studies. It learns timing. It learns reactions. It learns what you dismiss, and then it returns the same way, because familiarity lowers alertness. I remember being taught this clearly. If the person recognizes it as attack, change the form. If they don't, repeat it. That sentence stayed with me. Because repetition isn't meant to scare you. It's meant to train you into silence, and silence is agreement without words. This is why many sincere believers say, I don't feel attacked, I just feel tired. I don't feel oppressed, I just feel heavy. I don't feel threatened, I just can't rest. That language matters, because what you name incorrectly, you confront incorrectly. Night operations depend on mislabeling. If you call it stress, it continues. If you call it routine, it deepens. If you call it nothing, it expands. I didn't understand this until I left, until I became the target of what I once observed. That's when the repetition changed tone. Same hour, same heaviness, same dreams. But now I could recognize the structure. It wasn't random, it was scheduled, because repetition creates ownership. The longer something happens without challenge, the more it claims the space. This is why some bedrooms feel different at night, why some beds feel draining instead of restoring, why rest becomes effort. It isn't because God is absent, it's because awareness was delayed. And once awareness arrives, repetition loses its advantage. But here's what most people don't know. Repetition only works until it's interrupted properly. Not emotionally, not angrily, not loudly, but accurately. Because systems collapse when exposed, not when shouted at. I'm sharing this because many of you are blaming yourselves for something that was designed to feel ordinary. You didn't miss God, you noticed something, but didn't have language for it. And the moment language arrives, control shifts. Stay with me, because the next part explains why some people break free instantly, while others remain stuck even with prayer. And it has everything to do with what repetition was trying to build, before you became aware of it. It always started the same way. No sound, no movement, no warning. My eyes would open suddenly, not slowly, not groggy, open, as if someone had called my name without using sound. I wouldn't sit up, I wouldn't scream, I wouldn't even move. But my heart was already alert, beating faster than sleep should allow. Not panic, readiness. My mind would begin to race, not with thoughts I chose, but with awareness. I knew I was awake, I knew I had been asleep, and I knew the transition was not natural. I reached for reasons at first, stress, fatigue, imagination, but excuses collapse when patterns repeat. Night after night, the same interruption, the same moment. No alarm, no vibration, no noise from the outside world, just a sudden return to consciousness. And the silence felt heavy, not peaceful, not calm, occupied. It felt like the room had weight, like something had arrived before I woke up and was already there when my eyes opened. I wouldn't see anything. That's the part most people misunderstand. Visibility isn't required for presence. I would lie there, breathing carefully, aware that movement wasn't encouraged. The room felt attentive. That's the only word that fits, as though stillness itself was listening. I tested it once. I shifted slightly. My heart reacted instantly, faster, sharper, as if movement broke an agreement. That was when I stopped pretending this was random, because the timing never changed. Different days, different weeks, different seasons, same moment. The body remembers cycles the mind tries to dismiss. And I remembered something I hadn't wanted to remember. Before my conversion, before my escape, before light interrupted what I once practiced, timing mattered. Certain hours were chosen not because of clocks, but because of access, because resistance is lowest, because awareness is thin, because consciousness is suspended between worlds. There are windows that open not in space, but in condition. Sleep creates one of them. I used to participate in assignments that required no noise, no terror, no drama, just interruption, just extraction. Just presence. The goal was never to wake the person fully. The goal was to bring them close enough to awareness without strength. And when they woke suddenly, heart alert, mind racing, that was success. Because confusion weakens boundaries. Lying there years later on the opposite side of belief, I recognized the signal immediately. The body knew before the mind confessed it. This wasn't a bad habit. This wasn't anxiety. This was a scheduled moment. The silence wasn't empty. It was expectant. I remember thinking, they still remember me. That's the truth people don't like hearing. Leaving doesn't always mean forgotten, especially when knowledge was once exchanged. I would stay still, forcing my breathing to slow, refusing engagement, because acknowledgement strengthens contact. That's another thing few are told. Attention is currency. And then, after some minutes, it would lift, not fade, lift, like pressure being removed rather than disappearing. My heart would slow, the room would feel like a room again. And sleep would return, uneasy, fragmented. Morning came with exhaustion that didn't match the hours slept. And I knew if I, with awareness, with history, with discernment, could still experience this. How many people were waking at the same hour thinking it meant nothing? So hear this clearly. That hour is not random. But I won't name it yet, because once you know the number, you stop listening to the pattern. And the pattern matters more than the clock. If this has been happening to you, night after night, same interruption, same alertness, same heavy silence, you are not imagining it, and you are not alone. Stay with me. There is more you need to understand before the hour reveals itself. The reason I'm asking you to stay with this is because this part is where many people disconnect. Not because it isn't true, but because it explains things they've tried to forget. There was a time when I understood the night differently. I didn't fear it, I studied it. Night hours were chosen for a reason, not because people are weak, but because awareness shifts. When the body sleeps, access changes. I remember the first time I noticed it clearly. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't loud, it was efficient. People think attacks look like terror, but the most effective ones feel normal. You lie down, your breathing slows, your thoughts scatter, and something opens, not physically, but internally. That opening is not accidental. In those moments, instructions are easier to place, emotions are easier to influence, weariness is easier to exchange. Some nights were assigned, not random, specific people, specific outcomes. The goal was never to destroy immediately, it was to weaken quietly, delay, confuse, drain, because a tired person questions less, a weary mind resists less, a confused spirit blames itself. That's why many wake up already losing battles they never knew began overnight. I'm saying this carefully, because I once participated in observing these patterns. I saw how repetition worked. Same hour, same sensation, same outcome. And the person would say, I slept, but I'm exhausted. I don't know why I feel heavy. My prayers feel blocked. They assumed it was their fault. That belief was the real victory. Because once someone believes they are the problem, they stop looking for the real source. I didn't leave that world because it failed. I left because I saw what it was costing people. And I could no longer pretend ignorance. Some of you listening right now have felt that exchange. You wake up having lost motivation you went to bed with. You wake up with pressure you didn't carry during the day. You wake up emotionally behind. Those aren't random fluctuations. They follow rules, and exposure breaks rules. This is where I pause intentionally, because if you're still here at this point, it means something in you recognizes this pattern. So let this moment mark awareness. Type I receive light if you're still watching. Not for me, for you, because light doesn't arrive loudly, it arrives clearly. And clarity changes the night. What comes next is where understanding turns into protection. There is a type of night attack that doesn't announce itself with fear. No panic, no terror, no nightmare that makes you jump out of bed. Just confusion. And that's why it's effective. Fear makes people react. Confusion makes people pause. And a pause is all that is needed. When fear is present, people pray quickly. They call on God, they resist, they push back. But confusion does something else. It makes you question yourself. Maybe I'm tired. Maybe I'm overthinking. Maybe nothing is happening at all. That hesitation delays prayer, and delay creates space. I've seen this tactic used intentionally, because the goal is not always to scare you. Sometimes the goal is to soften you, to slow your response, to dull your awareness. There was someone I watched closely. Strong in night prayers, consistent, disciplined, alert. Every night they would wake briefly and pray. Not long, not loud, but intentional. Then the pattern changed. They began waking without fear. No urgency, just a fog. They would sit up and feel nothing, no alarm, no sense of danger, just a strange uncertainty. So they stopped praying at night, not because they were rebellious, not because they were lazy, because they didn't feel the need anymore. And that was the opening. For a while, everything felt better. Sleep felt deeper. The night felt calmer. Morning felt lighter. They thought the problem had passed. But what actually happened was permission. When resistance stops, access widens. Weeks later, the attacks returned, not as confusion this time, but as weight, heaviness on waking, distraction during the day, a quiet erosion of focus. What changed wasn't intensity. It was timing. The pause had been strategic. I know this because I've seen how these assignments are planned. When fear doesn't work, clarity is attacked. When clarity is attacked, prayer slows. When prayer slows, influence increases. It's not dramatic. It's gradual. People assume peace means safety. But peace without discernment can be borrowed. Real peace strengthens you. Borrowed peace makes you passive. That's the difference. Night attacks that leave no fear often leave something worse: delay. And delay doesn't look dangerous. It feels reasonable. Until you realize the night has been active while you've been silent. This is why some people say, "I don't feel attacked anymore," right before things intensify. The absence of fear is not proof of safety. Sometimes it's the setup. And if you've noticed your night prayers fading without a clear reason, if you felt calm but less alert, if resistance has quietly reduced, pay attention. Because confusion doesn't shout, it waits. And what it waits for is agreement through inaction. By this point, most people are already uneasy. They recognize the earlier signs, they've felt the exhaustion, they've noticed the timing. But this is the sign people try hardest to explain away, because it touches prayer itself. During the day, your prayers feel alive, words flow, focus comes easily. There's confidence in your voice. Even if you pray quietly, you feel heard. But at night, something changes. You kneel, you lie down, you open your mouth, and the urgency fades. Thoughts interrupt without invitation. Your mind drifts to things you didn't plan to think about. You feel the need to sleep right when prayer should deepen. The moment that should carry weight suddenly feels thin. You tell yourself you're tired. You tell yourself it's normal. That's what I told myself too. In the work I was involved in before I left that world, night prayer was never ignored. It was monitored. Because day prayer builds intention, but night prayer activates authority. During the day, people pray from effort. At night, they pray from position. That's why resistance shows up only then. I remember assignments where we waited, not for people to wake up, but for them to fall asleep after attempting to pray. Because when someone pushes past sleep to pray at night, they're no longer operating on routine. They're operating on awareness, and awareness triggers response. So the strategy wasn't always to stop prayer. That would raise suspicion. The strategy was interruption, distraction that felt harmless, drowsiness that felt natural, thoughts that felt personal. Nothing dramatic, just enough delay, just enough fog, just enough loss of urgency. I watched people pray powerfully at noon and struggle to finish a sentence at midnight, not because their faith was weak, but because night is when permissions are checked. That line wasn't symbolic where I came from. It was operational. Night reveals what has access. If something has permission, it doesn't need to frighten you. It only needs you to stop pressing. So prayer becomes heavy. Words repeat without weight. Minutes stretch. Sleep feels necessary, almost responsible. And you wake up thinking you prayed, but nothing shifted. That confusion is not accidental. I participated in systems that relied on it. Because if prayer stays strong during the day but weak at night, momentum never completes its cycle. People remain sincere, but stalled. They don't stop believing, they just stop advancing. And the most dangerous part? Most never realized the resistance wasn't coming from them. They assumed discipline is the problem. They assumed consistency is missing. They assumed God is quiet. But the pattern is too precise to be coincidence. Strong by day, scattered by night. Urgency interrupted by sleep. Focus dissolving right at the threshold. That's not fatigue, that's timing. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. But I'm still not giving you the solution. Not yet. Because before anything can be addressed, it has to be fully exposed. And we're not done uncovering what happens when the lights go out. Share this with someone who wakes up tired for no reason. I need to pause here, not to break the flow, but because this is the point where many people realize the story isn't just mine. Up until now, it may have sounded familiar. The exhaustion, the strange timing, the repeated patterns that refuse to change no matter how disciplined your life becomes. This is where confession turns into clarity. Before I walked away from the practices I once served, I learned something that most people are never told. The night is not passive. Sleep creates access, not because people are weak, but because they are open. During those years, we didn't look for people who were afraid. Fear made people noisy. Resistance made things complicated. We looked for people who were disciplined, sincere, prayerful, and tired. People who gave everything during the day and expected sleep to restore them. People whose guard went down because they believed rest was safe by default. That belief was the doorway. I remember instructions that were always the same. Observe patterns first. Study sleep cycles. Note the hour the body gives in completely. Nothing was rushed. Nothing was random. Certain hours were favored because the mind stops questioning. The body stops resisting. The will loosens its grip. And when a person is asleep, they don't argue. They don't analyze, they don't interrupt, they receive. This is why many people wake up feeling like something was taken rather than feeling rested. This is why the tiredness feels deeper than physical. This is why coffee doesn't fix it. Motivation doesn't touch it, sleep doesn't cure it. Because what happened wasn't physical fatigue, it was exchange. I'm choosing my words carefully because this isn't about imagination or dreams. It's about transactions people were never warned about. Some assignments were designed only to weaken, not destroy. The goal wasn't to end faith, just to make it heavy. Heavy prayer, heavy worship, heavy mornings, heavy enough that people assume the problem is them. I've seen people blamed for conditions they didn't cause, told to pray harder when prayer was already being interfered with, accused of laziness when something was draining them quietly. And the cruel part? Most of them never suspected the night. I did. Because I had been trained to use it. Walking away meant I had to face what I once helped normalize. It meant realizing how many people were suffering without language for it, without warning. There were nights I woke up after leaving that life, same pressure, same timing, same sensations, but this time I recognized them. Awareness changed everything. That's why I'm speaking now. Not to elevate myself, not to frighten you, but because exposure breaks cycles. If this message is resonating, it's not coincidence, it's recognition. And if someone you love wakes up tired, heavy, confused, share this with them. Because once you understand what the night can be used for, you stop blaming yourself for what was never your fault. And this is only the beginning of the revelation. Night matters because silence changes access. During the day, everything competes for attention. Voices overlap, movement distracts, intentions collide. But night removes friction. When sound lowers, awareness widens. When activity stops, entry points open. Silence is not empty, it is permissive. That is why watchmen were assigned to the night, not because danger was louder then, but because movement was easier to detect and influence was harder to hide. I learned this the hard way. Before my life changed, we never worked when people were busy. We waited until effort ended, until resistance rested, until prayer slowed into sleep. Because night doesn't just quiet the mouth, it quiets the will. In silence, suggestions travel farther. In silence, impressions stick longer. In silence, agreements form without conversation. That is access. And access always precedes influence. People think influence requires force. It doesn't. It requires timing. Midnight wasn't chosen because it was dramatic. It was chosen because it was cooperative. The body is still. The mind loosens its grip. Memory opens its doors. Imagination stops guarding the gate. This is why so many spiritual encounters in Scripture happen at night. Not to frighten, but to reveal a principle. When Jacob wrestled, it was not midday. When songs were sung in prison, it was not morning. When watchmen stood, they did not clock in at noon. Night concentrates intent. Darkness patterns are not about evil, they're about strategy. I participated in that strategy. We didn't need people afraid. Fear resists. We needed them relaxed. Open, unaware, Sleep creates a meeting place between the conscious and the unseen, not because sleep is weak, but because it is unguarded. And whatever reaches you unguarded doesn't need permission twice. That's why influence gained at night shows up as exhaustion in the morning, as confusion without cause, as heaviness that doesn't respond to effort. The person thinks the day is the problem. But the exchange already happened. Silence gave access. Access allowed influence. Influence shaped the day. This is also why midnight prayer carries weight. Not because God wakes late, but because fewer things compete for alignment. Prayer at night is not louder. It is clearer. When believers pray while others sleep, they are not fighting darkness. They are reclaiming access. They are standing where influence is decided. I say this carefully. If you only guard your day, you leave half your life unattended. I learned that from both sides. Night matters because it reveals what daytime hides. It shows what operates without applause. It exposes what depends on quiet cooperation. This is not about losing sleep. It's about understanding territory. Because once you recognize why the night is chosen, you stop blaming yourself for symptoms that started when you weren't even aware you were being approached. And awareness, quiet, steady awareness, changes everything. I need to say this carefully, because what stopped the night activity was not effort. It wasn't volume. It wasn't emotion. It was order. When I was still involved on the other side, we didn't fear people who prayed long. We watched for people who understood position. Length doesn't scare darkness. Authority does. And authority is not discovered in the moment of panic. It is established before sleep. Let me tell you what actually broke the pattern. Not once, but consistently. First, awareness. Everything changed when I stopped dismissing the signs. Repeated waking at the same hour. Rest without restoration. Pressure that appeared only after lying down. Dreams that drained instead of instructed. I stopped calling these normal. The moment you recognize a pattern, you interrupt permission. Awareness closes doors that ignorance leaves open. Second, consistency. Random warfare produces random results. What worked was choosing the same time every night before sleep. Not when I felt afraid. Not when symptoms showed up. Before. Consistency communicates structure, and structure disrupts access. Night assignments depend on unpredictability. Consistency removes it. Third, short authority prayer. This part matters more than most people realize. No begging, no explaining, no emotional speeches, just alignment and command. Because authority does not argue, it declares. I learned this from watching how commands were issued. Clear, brief, final. The prayer didn't impress anyone. It enforced boundaries, and boundaries are respected. Fourth, verbal declaration before sleep, not silent thoughts, spoken words, out loud, before lying down, because speech establishes jurisdiction, and silence can be mistaken for consent. I declared what was allowed. I declared what was not. I declared who governed that space. Then I slept, and that's when everything changed. No more repeated waking, no more unexplained exhaustion, no more carrying the night into the morning. Not because nothing tried, but because access was denied. This is the confession part. On the other side, we relied on people praying after the encounter. We counted on confusion. We expected fatigue. Very few people learned to govern the night before entering it. Those who did were avoided. Because when authority is set in advance, there is nothing to negotiate. Let me say it plainly, because this frees people. You don't need longer prayers. You don't need louder prayers. You don't need emotional exhaustion. You need recognition. You need consistency. You need clear authority. You need spoken alignment. That's it. And once the night is ordered, sleep becomes rest again. Not because the world changed, but because your position did. I didn't learn this part quickly. I learned it after trial, after failure, after watching what worked and what didn't. Because nights didn't stop just because I cried harder. They didn't stop because I stayed awake longer. They didn't stop because I used many words. They stopped when I changed position. Let me say this clearly. Length doesn't scare darkness. Authority does. Here's what actually interrupts night activity. Not theory. Practice. First, awareness. The moment you recognize a pattern, you remove permission. Before, people would come to us confused, tired after sleep, heavy for no reason. We knew exactly what hour to touch them, because ignorance is access. When you start noticing the timing, the repetition, the way your body responds before your mind does, you are no longer asleep inside. Awareness doesn't fight, it exposes, and exposure changes rules. Second, consistency. This part is quiet but powerful. Not random prayers, not emergency reactions, the same time. Every night. Before sleep became our window, we studied routine. What happens regularly becomes predictable. What becomes predictable becomes easy to enter. So when someone prays once today, skips tomorrow, returns the next day, there is no boundary. Consistency builds a line. You don't wait until pressure comes, you establish presence before it arrives. Third, short authority prayer. This one shocks people. The most effective prayers were never long. They were clear. No begging, no explaining, no emotional performance, just position. When authority speaks, it doesn't argue. One sentence spoken from alignment outweighs hours spoken from fear. I learned this from the other side. Long prayers revealed uncertainty. Short declarations revealed command. That's why I say it again. Length doesn't scare darkness. Authority does. Fourth, verbal declaration before sleep. Silence is not neutral. The last voice before sleep matters. Words spoken aloud mark territory. They signal jurisdiction. Before we waited for people to lie down quietly, because silence gave space. Now I understand. What you say before sleep decides what follows you into it. You don't speak to the night. You speak over it. Simple words, clear ownership, no drama. This is not shouting, this is alignment. When I changed these things, the nights changed, not instantly, but decisively. The pressure lifted, the repetition broke, the same hour stopped calling my name. Because warfare is not chaos, it is structure. And once structure changes, access collapses. This is not about being loud, it's about being placed. And once you stand in the right position, the night no longer recognizes you as open. That's the part people were never told. Most people wait until the attack gets louder. Pause. By then, the permission is already renewed. And this is the part few want to hear. Because what happens at night doesn't always begin at night. It begins with allowance. With unguarded patterns. With doors left open because they looked harmless in the day. I've watched it happen, from the inside. Before I walked away, before I confessed, before I exposed it, I saw how patience was used as a weapon. Nothing rushed, nothing dramatic, just repetition. A person ignores the first signs. The tiredness that sleep doesn't fix, the same waking hour, the heaviness that comes and goes. And because nothing bad happens, they assume nothing is happening. That assumption is powerful, because silence is often read as safety. But in the realm I came from, silence was confirmation. It meant access was still open. It meant resistance hadn't started. It meant the cycle could continue without adjustment. That's what people don't realize. Many attacks don't escalate because they don't need to. They repeat. They return to the same hour, the same weakness, the same unprotected space. And every time nothing is challenged, the permission resets. Night after night. I remember being taught this. Not as cruelty, as strategy. You don't frighten someone who can be drained quietly. You don't warn someone who hasn't questioned the pattern. You don't change methods when the door still opens. So the goal was never panic. The goal was familiarity. To make exhaustion feel normal. To make disturbance feel ordinary. To make the signs blend into life. Until one day the person says, "This is just how I am now." That sentence was victory. Because once someone accepts the outcome, they stop guarding the cause. And that's why waiting is dangerous. Not because something suddenly appears, but because something has already been returning. Over and over. What broke the cycle for me wasn't noise. It wasn't confrontation. It was recognition. The moment I understood the timing wasn't random, the moment I realized the night was chosen, the moment I saw the pattern for what it was, the access weakened. Because awareness interrupts permission. That's why I'm sharing this now, not to scare you, not to dramatize your experiences, but to stop the renewal. Because once you see it, you can't unsee it. And what no longer hides can no longer move the same way. This isn't the end of what I'm revealing. There's more you need to understand about how permission is given, how it's withdrawn, and why some people feel relief the moment they address it. But that comes next. For now, sit with this. If something keeps returning at night, it's not asking for your fear. It's counting on your silence. By now, you understand why I waited until the end to say this. What you heard wasn't meant to scare you. It was meant to name what many people feel but never identify. I've stood on both sides of this reality. I've watched how the night is used when awareness is low. I've seen how exhaustion is mistaken for weakness, and how silence is mistaken for peace. The truth is simple. What remains hidden keeps repeating. When these patterns stay unspoken, people blame themselves. They pray harder without understanding the resistance. They rest longer without receiving restoration. Exposure changes that. Awareness breaks cycles that effort alone cannot. Understanding interrupts what routine allows. That's why this message matters beyond this moment. If this helped you recognize what's been happening in your own nights, if it gave language to something you couldn't explain, then like this video so others don't stay unaware. Not everyone knows what to listen for. Not everyone recognizes the signs until someone names them. And subscribe, because exposure brings freedom. This channel exists to uncover what operates quietly and to replace confusion with clarity. I didn't share this to build a following. I shared it because I know what ignorance costs. And remember, light doesn't panic, it reveals. Stay aware, stay grounded, and don't underestimate what understanding can change.